Welcome back to another episode of the Rage of Aquarius podcast, the Outsider Astrology podcast.
All right. You
I,
sound so masculine today. It's got a very
it's
butch vibe. Like,
Rachel she got this new dark blend of coffee from the roasters, and it brought something deeper out in my loins. And
I guess
and
that'll go.
it's expressing I'm expressing my chi in ways that are reserved like only for the eight immortals.
Oh
My
my
name is
God.
Andre Burke. I'm your de facto host because I'm the one who introduces the show. And I'm sitting here with my lovely co-hosts, Rachel Capurso of Alien Heart Astrology and Frederick Woodruff of Woodruff Astrology. And in case you can't tell by our completely haphazard introduction, we're here to talk about Jupiter and Gemini.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our big theme today.
Yeah.
So right before we started, we were talking about the three beats for this new sign position. And I'll just go over them real quick for the listeners. So Jupiter enters Gemini May 25 and then makes a trine over to Pluto on June 3rd. And then, as I see it, the big tension that starts building is Jupiter moving into a square that perfects with Saturn in August of the summer, August 19.
That's correct.
Summer of Love 2024.
And that square will repeat one more time at the very end of the year, December 24th, Christmas Eve. So we are looking at
Holy night.
some squaring energy for sure, which will, in my opinion, those squares will be tense, obviously, but as we will be discussing, Jupiter in Gemini has a real tendency to hyperinflate, overexpand, and in some ways, I think that the squares to Saturn will offer us an opportunity to have a reality check, to take a pause and make sure that we're not overextending ourselves or becoming maniacal in some way. So
Mhm.
we can find some positive outcomes even in those squares. And because Jupiter rules the sign of Pisces, where Saturn is transiting, as the governor of Pisces, the Jupiterian spirit and that influence will not be totally negated. There's going to be something about this upcoming transit that will expand all of us philosophically. There's going to be a lot more interest in actually learning, which is something that requires openness of mind and a willingness to try on different ideas like hats, trying on different hats and being more open to ideas that perhaps are new, unfamiliar. And this will allow us all to expand our sense of reality. So I'm really looking forward to this shift in tone. I don't know about you guys.
So you're saying RFK has a chance?
No, that's not what I was saying. But let's just start at the beginning. So we're going to be feeling this shift of Jupiter, the planet of philosophy, wisdom, expansion, the planet that definitely is associated with wealth. Most people love Jupiter because of that association. But Jupiter really is the planet of proliferation, multiplication. Jupiter is associated with the sacral chakra in traditional alchemy, where the libidinal well creates both, children through procreation, but also anything artistic, anything that is, considered to be a creative act. That's the purpose of Jupiter, to multiply and proliferate and expand. And the path of Jupiter is associated with philosophy, wisdom, higher knowledge, and a desire to create things in this world that reflect the opportunity to transcend the most base nature, the most base elements of human nature, to refine and uplift and transcend the most negating aspects of human life. So this is why Jupiter is
Poverty,
also,
ignorance.
yeah, Jupiter's associated with higher learning as well as law, actually. It's law in its most idealistic sense, law.
So, okay, how does this work? Like people listening to this, like how do they interpret it like individually within their lives? That's what I'm kind of curious about, bringing that to the table. I mean, that's a great overview that you gave about the kind of higher philosophical side of Jupiter. But then how is it manifesting for people amidst this kind of chaotic time that we're living in right now? Like, do you see it as agitating even more kind of nonsense, that kind of novel side of Gemini, which is just stuff flying all over the place, which I think is why in traditional astrology, Jupiter has, I think it's detriment, like in Gemini, because
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I'm curious about like how would I think you brought up a good point mentioning it's applying square to Saturn as a mitigating factor for like too much craziness being unleashed with the transit. So it's like I can't help but see it as through the lens of like the ongoing, as you mentioned, the legal side that's associated with Jupiter. So this ongoing crazy, absolutely to me mind-blowing stuff that's going on right now in America related to especially the Supreme Court, but all of the other rulings that have been coming down, like the one in Arizona where abortions back to like 1860, laws and stuff like that. How do you see this Jupiter into Gemini impacting this kind of cauldron right now of legalese and to me, absolute absurdity. Like, did you guys follow the Supreme Court stuff yesterday?
No, please give us some details on what they
I
exactly.
mean, in a nutshell, they're actually seriously taking into consideration how they should look at the idea that Trump or a president would have immunity should they decide to like assassinate a rival. And instead of just throwing this out, the five of the justices are really, they're taking this like, oh, wow, we should, yes, really look at this. Would there be immunity for like a coup and then the person's being, murdered, at the president's discretion? I mean, stuff like that is absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
So, with your notion of Jupiter, Gemini, that a higher application of, philosophy, laws, learning, how do you think coming into this current biosphere of the culture, what do you guys think the impact's going to be in that sense?
Well, I think, the very beginning of this transit is definitely going to exaggerate the existing polarities. So the ideological polarities, certainly politics is the best example because the sign of Gemini represents the split into binary, black,
Yeah,
white,
right.
good and evil. And
Polarity is basis. Yeah.
exactly. And it's very defined and polarized at the beginning of the sign. And so I believe that ideological extremes are going to be exaggerated. There will be, and of course, this really reflects the fact that the latter half of 2024, at least in the US, is going to all be stirred by the election, which is essentially a type of civil war. And the ideological civil war that we are currently experiencing will definitely become way more extreme. But what I do see as well is that the openness and the air sign, it's an air sign, the intellect and ideas and the, the questions that people are asking will ultimately open people's minds far more than they have been for a very long time. Because despite the fact that at first the divide or the dual camps, the polarities become more extreme, there will also be better questions that are being posed.
Well,
And
that's
therefore,
encouraging. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like there will actually be an openness of mind eventually. It's a part of the process that will be evolving to open to new horizons, to ask big questions. And that's really what Jupiter is truly about in its most fundamental, essential form. Jupiter is that part of us that likes to ask questions and then receive expansion through the responses that we find. And so we actually grow through the questions that we ask. The quality of our experience is dictated by the quality of the questions that we are posing. And so there will
Right.
be more curiosity. And I do believe that ultimately Jupiter and Gemini could be best summarized by that curiosity that we all had as a child very naturally. The more that you can retain that curiosity, the more that you continue to grow and evolve as an adult. But this transit is going to spark curiosity. And therefore, people will be, despite their paradigm, despite the polarized paradigm that they may be comfortable in, that they may have gotten very comfortable in while Jupiter was in Taurus, transiting through fixed Earth, becoming quite stuck in their ways, quite comfortable in their, their specific worldview. Ultimately, Jupiter and Gemini is going to be an influence that opens up people to explore the other side of things. And even if it's not intentionally to become more accepting or more tolerant of someone else's worldview, that's just what naturally happens when you start to look at issues from a multipolar or multidimensional perspective. You just begin to understand a broader view. And therefore, I do think that what begins in May and certainly the month of June as a more polarized view of the world, I do think by the end of this transit, which will be June of 2025, many people will have opened up to a broader understanding of the world, a broader understanding of politics, or any other subject that becomes relevant to your journey and as an individual during this time. So,
Well,
yeah.
I hope so. I think one thing I tuned into with what you were just saying is I think the shift that would happen from, traditional mainstream media and people having kind of started to burn out on getting their information and news from those outlets. I think it's very much a Jupiter and Gemini type of shift where people are going more to local newspapers, smaller niche things like people that are publishing, say, on platforms like Substack now.
Yeah.
So they're starting to and maybe this is where the refreshing or the rebooting of information flow would happen, is out
Absolutely.
of the traditional modes that usually serve all this stuff up, because I think there's a cynicism now in place, and that's another shadow side I notice about Jupiter and Gemini just in general, is it can become cynical. That's really based on almost like an over glut of information coming in, and then the mind sort of just shuts down and
Oh,
goes
yeah.
negative,
Oh, yeah.
rather than trying to land on something and anchor into it. But what I'm curious about, like, say the popularity of this film that's out now called Civil War, and apparently that's doing well at the box office and seems, to be getting a lot of traction. When you look at traditional mundane astrology, I think Jupiter is associated with, like, I think the Democrats, and then Saturn with, conservatives or the GOP. So that's something that interests me, with the two coming into a square with each other. As
Mhm.
ominous as that sounds, because, this knee-jerk thing about squares, they're bad, they're negative, they're,
Yeah.
a challenge.
They call the cops.
Because what?
They call the cops.
Mhm.
Squares.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh God, I just now got it. Yeah, I think the good part of the square between the two planets would be the tension that builds actually, like, moves into some kind of a resolve, because it is mutable signs, and I think those signs of all of the qualities have an easier time kind of meshing and melding. So that's what I'm hoping, related to the impact that news, information, blogs, YouTube, TikTok, all of that.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that, comes to what you're talking about, where people really see the necessity of having, I guess you could call it, like, quality information or truth coming in
Yes.
and align with that. But I'm sorry, and then I'll finish here. I don't know if you saw the woman that took over for NPR last week. Did you follow that?
I saw the headlines. I'm unfamiliar with the story, though.
Anyway, I'll just nutshell it, because I started to listen to some of her, I don't know, like TED Talks or different interviews that she did. And, she's accused of being ultra woke, comes, I don't know, from white privilege. So it's sort of like this weird irony that what her fixation is, as far as a social justice warrior and everything that connotes. But it was interesting, in this one interview, she was saying, well, our biggest problem for people nowadays, and I'm paraphrasing, is the First Amendment is really like something, that we have to consider as a real issue. And I was like, wow, really? The First Amendment? Like,
Yep.
okay. So then I was like, wow, we're really entering another level of crazy town now about information and news and truth.
Yeah.
So she says, well, my truth is my truth. You have a different truth, and there's, truths everywhere.
Right.
And I was like,
Here
wow,
truth, there truth, everywhere truth.
there you go. So there's mutable sign kind of craziness to me, that kind of a statement. So again, hopefully the square brings the pressure in, and then people are just like, fuck, I've had enough. I've got to, get clear here. What is truthful? What's bullshit? And then there we go.
Well,
Now let's talk about Jupiter on Trump's sun. No, I'm kidding.
Right. Well, we can, 1 second though, but the opening act of Jupiter and Gemini is this trine to Pluto in Aquarius.
Right.
Is, at 2 degrees, and that's very close to where the great conjunction happened between Jupiter and Saturn at the end of 2020, that winter solstice. And that Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the 0 degrees Aquarius is developing this year at those squares between Jupiter and Saturn. So that conjunction between them is now in the opening square of that new cycle. And
How do you
so,
unpack that? What do you see? And Andre too, we haven't heard from him. Like, how do you unpack that with
well,
the great conjunction? Because that is a great point.
yeah, I mean, to me, the sign of Aquarius, 0 degrees, which is, the very first degree of a sign, sort of contains it's like a seed. It contains the entire structure and the whole life cycle
The
and
theme.
yeah, and the full story of the sign is right there in the first degree of the sign. And so that conjunction not only changed the element that Jupiter and Saturn will be, working with for the next 200 years. So we open
Right.
a new 200-year cycle, but that 0 degrees Aquarius to me really digs into the idea that the outsider perspective, the heretical approach, and also the blend of not just futuristic imaginings. Aquarius is always given this, this kind of futuristic, technological, and also dystopian slash utopian image. But I really see Aquarius as being the perfect blend of ancestral wisdom, things that come from the ancient world that are unearthed or remembered and woven into what is happening currently and what is going to be seeded into the future. Because Aquarius is a sign that is ruled by Saturn, and it is just as tapped in to the ancient world as it is to any vision of the distant future. And the
Mhm.
reason that I say that is because it shows up as the 11th sign in the zodiac. And by that point, the whole idea of mastering the world, conquering the world of matter, building things, achieving high status, climbing those ladders, climbing to the top of the mountain, those Capricorn themes have been sacrificed for something beyond. And so Aquarius represents this kind of like retreat into the wilderness. And by the 11th sign in the zodiac, we're almost done with the story, and things start to reveal themselves in a very different way. Time itself is no longer seen as a line. You no longer see linear time. You can actually perceive that time is a loop. It's, in fact, a cycle, it's a circle. And when you see time as a circle, which of course astrology does, and the traditional wisdom of all ancient cultures did see time as a circle, that reveals that, yeah, the ancient past and the distant future converge at the same point, somewhere on that circle. And so to me, Aquarius is building a future that is just as inspired by lost knowledge, ancient wisdom, and even some traditional wisdom, which is where I'm getting to right now, because not only does that square between Jupiter and Saturn this year develop something that was planted back in December 21 of 2020. That seed that was planted is going to start to germinate this summer. But also, there is something about the idea of this totally relative truth, like you were talking about before, just like my truth versus your truth. These things were not a problem in the traditional worldviews that, we take Hermetic philosophy from, because in Hermetic philosophy and many other traditional wisdom teachings, there was an absolute truth that was represented by the divine mind, the one, the all. The cosmos itself was conceived of as an objective truth. It was an absolute truth. And so from that absolute, then our subjective and personal experiences could be reflected upon. But there was no loss of a sense of some deeper absolute truth. And so this is, I believe, a philosophical point of view that is going to come back into common language and common, the currency of ideas, because to continue to split hairs and mince words and shift all definitions until there's no meaning left, and just having a constant battle between my truth versus your truth when it comes to really important issues, that's going to create chaos that never stops and continues to just dissolve into chaos. So there will be some sense of people looking for grounding in absolute truth, from which they can then expand and reflect and consider other ideas. But without that firm foundation or that central absolute, in other words, I do believe like the traditional worldview is going to come back in a big way. And it's not going to be just a recreation or a reenactment. It's going to be something that just informs the philosophical development of this time. And it is
This is informed by the Jupiter-Pluto.
the seed that was planted at the Great Conjunction at the end of 2020.
And that's where Pluto's hanging. That's where he's having his smoke break right now.
Pluto is there. And when Jupiter enters Gemini on May 25th, there's going to be just like a week later on June 2nd, this perfects a trine, which is a really positive harmony, by the way, this trine between Jupiter and Pluto sitting there around the same degree in Aquarius. And then in, late August 19th, that first square between Jupiter and Saturn will perfect. And that's going to be an opportunity for, a little bit of a, reining things in a little bit, having a little bit of a reality check. But there is something so philosophical about even that square, because like I said, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, where Saturn is sitting. And so I see the collective mind really evolving and developing a better philosophical perspective to handle the pressures of these times, which is so plagued by information overload, is so plagued by propaganda as well as censorship, the control of information and the control of minds is so intense. It is such a huge problem right now. And in fact, the government, at least in the United States, and I'm sure this is true everywhere, they just expanded their powers to spy on their own citizens through through FISA. They just expanded FISA 702 and FISA, which has been seriously getting worse and worse since 2008. And they have basically taken the absolute license to read your emails, go through your phone, do anything that they want, look at all of your information and anything that you've ever communicated without a warrant or any real reason.
Well, if you're considered tied in with some kind of foreign movement or entity, I mean, it's got all these weird little like footnotes and, of course, it leans towards what you're saying, but I just wanted to clarify that it's really couched as this sort of, anti-terrorist foreign interference. And then how,
the FBI guys, they've got to have like an incognito tab open where they're totally not using it for that, and they're like spying on their ex-girlfriend or or their landlord or something, like.
I mean, we just need to be real about human nature, and also the fact that these definitions are so broad and vague that
and designed that way,
and designed that way, exactly, to give a lot of license to, absolutely violate people's constitutional rights, which are becoming less and less defended.
So I think I want to just clarify something about what was brought up for listeners that might be a little bit fuzzy about what we were talking about. From 2020, there was the grand conjunction between, Saturn, Jupiter in Aquarius at that. Was it 0 or 1 degree?
It was 0.
0 degree.
Okay, right. So we're referencing that and then talking about right when Jupiter goes into Gemini, it's going to trigger by a trine to Pluto, which is sitting on that grand conjunction, that seed point. Now, the way I see that is and I see intimations of this already in the culture, because these things aren't like locked into like, these tight chapters. I think there's overlay.
Yeah.
And like the Pluto sitting on that conjunction point, I think is really exposing the kind of fraud that has been perpetrated with all this tech the futuristic, technological, cyber, all of this frenzy. Pluto sitting there, I think, is really like alchemizing and clarifying or purifying, getting things, burnt right down to like the bare truths about those promises. And then Jupiter making that trine. Jupiter's the big like New York Times planet in the zodiac in the sense of publishing and news distribution, dissemination. That trine to that Pluto, people are starting to get the message about all of this bullshit.
Yep.
I don't know if you followed the whole thing with Elon Musk and the big cyber trucks that were, oh my God, you guys. First of all, take a minute later to go look at those vehicles. There's a whole like scandal now. I think every one of those vehicles has been recalled by Tesla because the accelerator is sticking and people can't get it lifted up, so they're throttling 100 miles per hour into walls with no ability to really stop the thing, so they've had to recall them. But anyway, this is just a goofy example about what I'm talking about. This more and more you're seeing things come out now that dispel this patina and glamour around the tech world. And that to me is Pluto sitting on that great conjunction point that really ratcheted all of this mania up for like tech.
Absolutely. And even I feel like the whole notion of AI being promoted as something that either is equivalent to or superior to human intelligence, human creativity, that in and of itself is such a lie. And it's based upon the Turing test, which was developed by this mathematician, Alan Turing, 1950s. An interesting man, a brilliant man, but, a very linear Enlightenment era man. And his test for to prove whether a machine can think or not is something that is extremely biased and is based upon a false premise from the beginning.
It's kind of like the dating game, wasn't it? Like you're asking somebody questions who's in the other room, who's like behind a wall, and you gotta like be, like, do you have long hair or short hair? It was also incredibly gendered, so it was like so not with the times. But
the test is something like that,
yeah.
I believe. But anyways, the point is that he created this, this test, which is a series of questions that if, quote unquote, if a machine could converse with a person and convince them that they were human, then that would prove that this machine can think, as in can think like you and I, is actually equivalent to or superior to a human being. And, this test has been questioned and disproven through very rational and scientific arguments. And yet it still remains this gold standard of proof that the chat bots that we're all playing with now and the other forms of AI are in fact sentient. And so that kind of ideological, I think it's very religious personally. I see that as like a religion that is emerging. That religious ideology of machines being sentient, artificial intelligence being superior to human intelligence, that is something that I believe is going to be questioned en masse. And perhaps that is going to be one of the things that really becomes one of the great polarities in the collective mind is, do you really believe that this constitutes intelligence, real thinking, creativity, or not?
I think Dorothy Parker said it best when she was challenged to use the word horticulture in a sentence on the fly, and she said, you can lead a horticulture, but you can't make her think.
So that's a great segue to what I was just going to bring up about. I think that, like, to back all this up, to understand sort of the frenzy, you have to realize, like, when tech exploded, say, really with, of course, the personal computer and then all of that, then the next evolution, social media, after, the internet was established. I kind of see them as one and the same. But all of these tech bros, and really there's very few women in this realm, which is always a red flag to me. All of these tech bros and gurus that making billions, and there was nowhere where, what could they do with all of these billions? So suddenly they're making like Grubhub and hire a maid with an app and all this ridiculous shit that has been foisted on people as, the next big thing. Well, the story with all that stuff. It never really makes a profit. They have to like burn it into the ground before, they can flip it into like some kind of an Amazon business model or something. But I think, so when AI popped out, it was like all of this rush of these people like looking for, the next thing. And so all of that focus went into that. And that's what is like this piranha tank right now of this just frothing craziness, that this is going to be the thing, that elevates everything, takes it to the next level, won't have to go visit your parents in the old folks home because a robot, will be there in place for you, just, more madness like that. And I think, just again, because we've hammered on this many times in the podcast, I think, Pluto going through Aquarius is just going to be this cold douche on all of this mania. Not to say that AI isn't going to find a place for it, as a tool for people. I mean, but again, these bizarre elevated hallucinations and dreams.
Yes.
And when you look at the people dreaming them, they're really kind of grotesque people. Like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, this other guy, can't forget his name, is, from Stanford. And, just, I was just reading about him today in a piece, and, he's advising that people, succession needs to start happening throughout the country. Let the tech lords, move into governance, just absolute.
Is he that guy that thinks he's going to live forever? That like takes like 100 vitamins a day, and
he's literally turning himself. He looks like a lesbian now. I mean, nothing.
I always think it'd be really funny if like one of those guys gets hit by a Cybertruck with a broken accelerator.
I saw a series of like, it was 7 years worth of photos of that guy. I forget his name. It's something like Bill Smith or something.
It's a really generic sounding name.
But he literally is he looks like a fetal, like, android. He's, he's very shiny and moist and very, very unctuous, bizarre. Like
it took me years to find out that guy wasn't like an Andy Kaufman-esque troll.
Right.
That like I'd see his videos and I'd be like, oh, this guy's got to be joking. Like this has just got to be some kind of like, I'm gonna go lean into the most like evil tech lord diatribe, and it's just like, no, if people don't stop me, then I'm just going to keep doing it, and somebody will catch on eventually.
He's spending literally $1 million, I think, is it a month or a year, on this self-palpating obsession with, living, as long as he possibly can. I just have to say, I stole that joke from Bill Maher about him turning into a lesbian. So
I
blame it on Bill Maher.
Yeah, I know the look. It's some men, they age in reverse, and they start, they have a second life as like a beautiful lesbian gender studies professor.
Well, I think that's a real thing, though. I think men start to effeminate as they age, and then women start to look more. I mean, Madonna looks like kind of an old, Italian man now
Yeah.
with a wig on.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting what goes on in the DNA. Well, Andre,
we might have to cut this part out, but
Madonna looked much stranger than that because of all the weird fillers and.
on that note, I would love to use that as a
what did
segue.
Rachel say?
Oh, I said because of all the fillers and stuff in her face, she looks very strange, like a bloated Persian cat, kind of.
Right. But
That
even
look.
before all the face work, I was just noticing, and it was an Italian friend of mine that pointed that out to me. He goes, well, often Italian women, come to resemble, older men as their,
Totally.
the bone structure and the hormones shift and diminish and stuff like that. But
Yep.
it is interesting as
Well,
another topic for another show.
Yeah.
Androgyny of aging.
I do see, just to close down all of that, come full circle, these people, the leaders of the tech industry, their glamour has definitely waned. Their, position of influence is no longer something that seems dazzling or romantic or ideal. And the truth is that despite the fact that they think that they're something really special, that they represent something really unique in human history, they don't. They're just fascists. The definition of fascism is taking a corporation and the government and melding them together to oppress the common people. And when you have government and private industry working together in lockstep to control the population, that's what fascism is. So all of those people are fascists. That's what.
But they
And-
also they have, sorry, Andrea, then I'll finish. But they have no like actual human empathetic ability. I mean, like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, those billionaires, they also left like incredible legacies for the culture.
Yeah,
The
American library system, right?
But Zuckerberg's putting 25 billion a year into underground bunkers on Kauai that have gymnasiums and it just it's so.
Dude, he's starting the world's biggest underground nightclub, So what? We don't get invited,
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of future Howard Hugheses with these geeks,
They've lost context. I mean, context is really everything. We're living in like incredibly ahistoric times. The thing you mentioned earlier, Frederick, about this new NPR chief, giving a mouthpiece to this idea that the freedom of speech it's on the chopping block. It's one of the truths that we must, while we still have the freedom of speech to deconstruct it, we ought to. I've been hip to this idea that something's up with our liberty to speak our mind freely. But when as we all know here, a little, inside joke, but my nephew works in a bookstore, and it's like that bookstore that like your conservative, that metropolitan, cosmopolitan bookstore that your good country folk parents warn you about in the big city. It's the most cutting edge radical literature there.
Right.
And one of the first books I saw when I walked in there was something to the effect of like, questioning free speech and our way forward into the future. And I'm like, it's just, this is a book. I remember going into, radical left-leaning bookstores 20 years ago and seeing the First Amendment on the wall.
Seeing the what?
Seeing the First Amendment on the wall, like a poster of the First Amendment,
wow. Cool.
And like, and now you go in and it's like, and it's just, and it's, I don't think it's necessarily in bad faith, but I don't think it's in any faith, because we've lost the reason why the Carnegies and the Rockefellers were, leaving legacies behind is because they understood that balance between the Capricorn Aquarius, dark corner of the zodiac, or the scary, no man's land of the zodiac, where, like Rachel said, Aquarius isn't just about like breaking down old systems. It's about like preserving, working with what works, what's worth working with. In Capricorn, yeah, you will just keep doing shit because it's just how we've done it forever in this company. And we don't need, we don't need, young whippersnappers and disruptors coming in and changing the way we do things. But Aquarius it will look at what works and what doesn't, and it will like leave behind what, in the ruins, what didn't work, and it will actually take with it what you can still use to advance your studies, advance your knowledge, and advance the knowledge of the human race. The I've the last few ever since I got hooked on the chat GPT, and I've just got like a main line. I've got a chat GPT drip in my, going like right into my aorta as we speak pretty much. But the figure, like the historical figure, the truth that's worth keeping from the past that keeps popping out at me is William S. Burroughs, and specifically the cut up experiments that he was doing with Brian. I'm still not sure if it's pronounced Gysin or Gysin, but at the Beat Hotel in Paris in the 1960s. And I don't want to get into the whole history of how they developed the cut up and what makes it so original. But what I will say is this, when Rachel pointed out how, the definition of fascism is when private corporate interests and the state conspire against the people, what you get there is you get this feedback loop that just it cannot be penetrated. It's just one hand is shaking the other, and we're down on the floor, shining everyone's shoes, and there's no way to get above it because it becomes like a deadlock. This is mirrored in the AI, the rise of AI, which I don't think that AI is at all the danger in and of itself, the danger or the deliverance that it's being touted as. I think a lot of that might be a smokescreen for what's really going down, which is R, or augmented reality. And these are these like VR headsets, these in completely immersive digital and virtual environments that we're going to be expected to live in probably by the end of the decade. The Apple Vision and stuff like that.
Right.
And when you consider how 100 plus years ago, people were so convinced that the train coming into the station was really going to pop out of the screen that they fled the theater.
Oh, right. I've seen those videos.
Like that's how much the brain is easily tricked into believing reality. You've got these drone strike operators that are sitting in a trailer out in the Nevada desert that are experiencing the same level of post-traumatic stress disorder that combat veterans are. And they haven't ever seen any, kinetic action. You have they ran experiments back in the 90s where they would take little kids whose brains were still forming and didn't know the difference between up and down pretty much. They still thought they were just this like blessed soul swimming in their mother's in the expansive ocean of bliss within their mother's womb for all time and eternity. They ran experiments where these cognitive scientists were playing virtual reality simulations of whales, of swimming with whales. And then they'd bring these kids in a week or two later and they say, "Hey, do you remember when we were swimming with whales last week?" And the little kids would just pick up, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was the coolest thing ever." They didn't know they were seeing a projection. They didn't know they were seeing a simulation. They're grown up now, these kids, and there are people in this world that literally believe that they were swimming with whales when they were 4 years old. My point is that when this stuff actually really starts enveloping us, immersing us, the technology that's going to be running it is AI. And so it's a lot like that. It's the little man behind the curtain. Like the tech bros aren't going to be using augmented reality. And if they do, it's going to be to like maybe just go to a few meetings and stuff. They're going to be using the code that's behind the program. And that's what they want. That's what AI is really going to be used for. And it's that link between, it's a mirror of the marriage of corporate and state power, where you have you have this kind of surface level, like, I guess, phenotype experience, which is the AR, where we don't know we don't know how it's being used, or what is actually going into it. We don't know. It's like not knowing what's actually in the food you eat, and they've been feeding us poison for the last 50 years. And then you have, the scientists behind behind the matter that actually know what's going on and know how this shit's actually being used. They know how to program it.
When you say, like, I think you opened up your argument with, it's like a smoke screen. You mean that, like, something like that's, I mean, that term comes, I think, from like military operations.
Yeah, well, it's a diversion. It's actually it's saying, oh, watch out, AI is the boogeyman. Then when you read about augmented reality, all you read about is how much it's going to help the medical field. It gets all of this like great PR for how it's gonna blow. It's gonna help law enforcement, and it's gonna help the medical industry. It's going to help us grow better. It's going to help us solve world hunger and all this stuff. So the reason, just to tie it all up, bring it all full circle, the reason why I bring it back to Burroughs, why I brought up Burroughs in the first place, is, and his cut up experiments, is this was his, he saw this world congealing back in the 1960s, with post-war mass media, globalization, all of that shit was already kind of, it was well past its embryonic stage. And the cut up is where, it's one of those things you roll your eyes at when you first hear about it, because it just sounds like something a lazy art student would do. But when you actually consider the power it puts in your hands to write a poem by taking a newspaper that is all about, programming your reality. That's your daily program. That's your daily, that's your daily software update, is the newspaper in 1960s terms. And just taking a fucking pair of scissors to it and cutting it up and mixing the obituaries with the sports section, and mixing the personals ads with the president, with the politics.
Right. Okay, so but how does that? What is that, like, a representation of?
Well, it's a represent of this, the splitting apart of that corporate and state controlled power system. The narrative, where you have the power to just cut into the very tool, i.e. a newspaper, that has been used for, I don't know, centuries now, to just make sure everybody's on the same page, no pun intended,
Right. But what would what would be the what would be the outcome of that? Or what's the culmination of that? Or what's the argument or reasoning?
Well, what I really love about it is that it's, you can stretch to say that it was a great influence on, like, hip hop, for sampling and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, of all, like, the more transgressive, radical style art techniques and art movements that have happened in the last, like, 50 years, it's never really been commercialized. It's never been recuperated. It's impossible, because the poetry that you make out of it is unreadable. It only makes sense when you do it yourself. When you take a copy of, the Holy Bible, and you cut it up with a copy of Origin of the Species.
Okay, well then what is that doing for a person? I'm still trying to get on.
It's jamming. I mean, it untethers these, like, fixed concepts you get in your mind.
So give me an example, like, of somebody, like, in a literal way, like, doing, like, what would they be doing? Like, what would the impetus be? Like, what would they? You
could take, let's say, you could take the Meta's user agreement and print it out. And then, because the user agreement, that's all of us that are on a Meta platform have consented to whatever's in that.
Okay, so that's printed out.
Yeah, print it out and then cut it up with the Unabomber Manifesto.
Okay.
Yeah, print out a copy of the Unabomber Manifesto, and there's a protocol to it where you actually, if anybody's interested, I could link it in the description. But you'd cut each page into fours, And then you would rearrange it so that basically one half of the top is the meta end user agreement, and then the other half would be the Unabomber manifesto. And
And
it's
to
like
what
it's reversed on the bottom. And then the idea is it's like a communal thing. You're doing it with a partner or a group of people, and you would read it out loud as almost like an incantation or a hex, even against the consent that you really did not give these tech companies to use their platforms out of mere convenience, because it's how you stay in touch with everybody. Because
right.
they've kind of just they bulldozed and then railroaded themselves into the public utilities.
So this is just like personal, like titillation. I mean, obviously Zuckerberg isn't going to release
That
someone from their terms of
no,
agreement.
yeah, that's
The
what. Yeah, it's
Unabomber.
not. Yeah,
This
it's
is
not
pure
about. It's
Jupiter
not.
and Gemini.
Yeah, no, it's not about. It's not about. Like I said, it's not about like the end product. It's not about the end result. If it was, it would have caught on more commercially.
So it's
But
just training the mind to
Yeah.
unplug from.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
have
So
a really
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so
Wow.
yeah, I'll wrap it. And so I'm not saying, I mean, it's a really fun and I've actually started doing them again. I did them back when I was like 16 and I first got into burrows, and it seemed like something cool, but I didn't really have the lived experience to understand,
Sure.
how systems of control actually work on you in life. But what I'm saying is adopting more of this ethos in this coming era. And I'm looking at William S. Burroughs' natal chart as we speak, and his Saturn is at 11 degrees, and that's like, and his sun
11 degrees what?
11 degrees Gemini. He's a Aquarius rising, Aquarius sun, with his moon conjunct Saturn in Gemini, and his Saturn is conjunct to very close to that point where the square will happen.
Mhm.
So my point is to say, like, I don't have a solution to say like this is how we can apply the cut up to the tech world. I mean, that's essentially what hackers were doing back in the 80s and 90s. Was they were cutting up the security systems, the security chains, to get an advantage behind the curtain. So and I'm also not suggesting that we all go join Anonymous, because that was probably a psyop anyway. But what I am saying is to adopt this kind of ethos that at any time you can, quote unquote, storm the reality studio, and you can actually cut ties with the control that we've all inadvertently consented to without our consent. And scene.
Thank you, Andre. Cool.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's a nice metaphor for it's a literal practice, but it's also a really great metaphor for what I see with Jupiter and Gemini as well, which is opening new neural pathways. And the way that we can open new neural pathways is by being able to become free of those grooves that we get stuck in. Like, we get so stuck in our little comfortable roads, the conditioning and the assumptions, and then the paradigms, the reality tunnels, as Robert Anton Wilson called it. And the cut up technique is a method to
Right.
free yourself of that and actually open up new pathways, which is what learning is.
It's like throwing an underground raid in your reality tunnel.
I guess, yeah.
So
So that's what
yeah, so I think on a literal level, it's very interesting, because as all this sort of crescendoed, it was like, wow, this is like pure Jupiter and Gemini. Like, the whole thing of the cut-ups and
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like, just, it's sort of like this explosion, this expansive explosion, Jupiter in the lexicon of human culture, Gemini. And this, so it's like, go get Bowie's album Heroes and Low, because he used cut
He
up.
did. Yeah.
And also go get
Yeah.
those refrigerator poetry magnet collections.
Yeah.
Remember those where it's like
dude,
5,000 words?
I have a legendary one that I wrote at an apartment on Haight Ashbury. I'll see if I can't pull it out and post a link to it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, I need to wrap, because
Yeah,
of
for
my
sure.
crazy ass schedule today. I
Thank
think
you.
we'll do Trump's, the Jupiter moving into his, Uranus and Sun in the next. Maybe we'll talk about that with Elsa, who's going to be our guest in June from
Sweet.
Elsa.
That would be great. Yeah.
She is a trip, probably the first astrology blog on the internet.
Oh my God, I'm excited. That's going to be really amazing. I look forward to that. And yeah, we will continue to talk about Jupiter and Gemini because there's obviously.
How could we not with Jupiter in Gemini?
Woo, all right. So thank you so much, Frederick. And
thank you guys. It was a
Thank you.
blast.
This was just our elevator pitch
Right on.
for Jupiter and Gemini.
All right. Well,
Just wait till you read our 5,000-page manuscript.
Great, you guys. Good connecting.
Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty.
We off?